I'm really excited to share with you, especially all the CFOs and our wonderful financially driven people here today, because this is a really interesting topic that many of you will have to be operating in, is making people decisions in the organization. And often it's the most complex and underanalyzed part of a business. And often people bring to us more subjective perspectives of what we should do around people management, if you think about the structure and all of those components of your business. And it makes it really hard to make those the right decision or know what the right decision is, knowing that we like to have more data, especially when it comes to these very expensive parts of our business. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you today and sharing with you some insights and what type of data you could be getting access to. We work with a number of small, medium-sized businesses. So this isn't out of reach, regardless of if you've got 20 staff, 40 staff, or 100 staff. This is all data that you can get your hands on. So what I want to mention, though, is for many of you, there is a huge line item on your P&L, and often it's the most expensive line item. If you add up everything to do with people-related costs, we would see on average that line item or line items combined, when you think about people costs, sitting about 70% of your P&L. That's a huge part of your organization's cost. And it's often, as times get more challenging, those labor costs is often where organizations look to make those cuttings of costs. It'll be around people-related activities. But it's often we don't actually look at that until we're under times of pressure and stress. And the business is going through a pain period. The first thing we do is go, okay, what can we minimize? And it will typically be a staff component, whether it's roles, whether it's expenses, whether it's traveling, whether it's office locations, whether it's training and those components. We turn to the most expensive part of your business, which is people. But unfortunately, we also don't really do anything proactive to analyze it and to see, are we optimizing the people side of our business? And how can we maximize it? How can we drive a better return on investment? What are the things we should be doing to looking at the performance and making those adjustments? So that's what we want to uncover today and really explore, knowing that this is such a critical part of a business and its success is the people within it. But I'd like to mention, though, in 2023, we're actually navigating some of the most challenging times in the workforce. If we look at the economy and what's going on, and even the reports that are coming out, we're seeing that, one of the first trends we're seeing is there's a massive skill gap crisis that most organizations are facing. There's lots of reports coming out around the gap that we're going to have in the future and that we currently do already have. So for those organizations looking to scale and expand their businesses, move into new sectors, whether it's around technologies or product or just market, there's going to be a skill gap issue. You either can't recruit the people with the right skills, or the people that you do get in, you're going to have to develop skills that they don't have. Engineering is a huge industry that they're already foreseeing, 200,000 vacant roles that they won't be able to fill because they're not going to have enough engineers in the space. Each industry has its own skill gap crisis, but I imagine for everyone on the call here today, there will be a struggle. I can't get people in my own finance team sometimes, or it's actually from the wider organization's perspective. Now, this is going on. A lot of businesses kind of putting their heads in the sand, going, oh, yeah, we'll just navigate it when we get to it. We need to get prepared now. We cannot wait until that crisis is in our face and we then can't deliver on our strategy, because that's what it will come down to. Is our business will not be successful because we have a people problem, and it will typically be around this skill gap issue. We've also then got to understand that for many organizations, they're facing the triple squeeze. And some of you are like, what is the triple squeeze? This is when you've got supply chain issues. So whether you're sort of bringing in a product or whatever it might be, we've got obviously inflation. Australia economy is heavily impacted by inflation at the moment, so the cost of things. Oh, and then by the way, we don't have enough people to do the jobs that you have. So they're referring to this as the triple squeeze, and it's what organizations have to navigate through. It's obviously very prevalent for manufacturing-based businesses or any organization that might be supplying a product. I can't get it imported. The cost of import is really high. I've got delay. and then we can't get people to actually help us drive the business forward. We're also looking at the cost of talent rising. We're paying more for people than we did, 2-3 years ago, but exponentially more. And so you see some data coming out from RMIT saying organizations are admitting to overpaying, right? Just to secure that talent. There's so few people on the market. So we're having to overpay these inflated salaries. And this is really starting to hurt organizations in the long run. It's also putting those individuals at risk because as the business goes through tough times, they may be the people that are identified as being inflated. But the reality is that's some measures that people have had to do to secure talent. We then look at the fact that the ways of working have changed. We've got people working, different location, different hours. We've got the introduction of the 4-day work week. We've got lots of things. And the business is facing that pressure of how do we handle this? Because it is a new way of managing and leading our organization. If we were previously a clock watching business through observational leadership, they found that really challenging because now people are working more freely remotely and we've had to totally adapt the way we manage. Most businesses haven't then trained their managers of how to manage a remote workforce or a more diverse workforce. And lastly, one of the other large trends that would be impacting many of you here on the call today is this VUCA environment. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of VUCA, I would say go ahead and Google it while you're on this call. This is really looking at the volatility of things, the uncertainty of what's going on in any given environment at any point in time. VUCA is quite an old term, but we're saying right now this is a heavily VUCA time because it's very uncertain. There's lots of change, lots of ambiguity. And when you're running a business, how hard is it to manage and inspire your people where we don't know what's going on, we don't know what's happening, there's lots of change. And you can see there's some statistics about employees are just unsure what this means for them. Where is my career? Where am I going? Where's the business going? Uncertainty typically creates a level of underperformance. Underperformance impacts your ability to deliver. So these are all the things that you are having to navigate through as a business, as someone who's looking after the financial aspect of the organization. You're not just dealing with your organization, you're dealing with your organization in this landscape. So look at how challenging this is. And you're having to wade through it and then make informed decisions, probably around your people with not a lot of data. Now, I'm going to share with you an age-old piece of information. You're going to already know this. We look at when we have a disengaged staff member, someone who's like, I'm confused, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not engaged in what I'm doing. These people cost you money, right? You're paying them a salary, they're not delivering on what's required. They may lack the skills to do their job and they're kind of winging it, hoping they'll make through. They may be just a really poor fit for their job. They don't enjoy their job anymore. It doesn't inspire them or motivate them. And then sometimes we start to see negative behaviors. Now, when we get negative behaviors, we see that toxicity. We all know how draining those individuals are in our business, and we spend a lot of time managing those negative behaviors and negative performers because they can be very disruptive. But we often spend a lot of time dealing with them, and that costs you more money. So we would say, how much does a low performer or a disengaged person cost you? Now that will vary, role to role, but it's a good question to ask yourself. As we're going to talk a little bit later about mapping your staff into a bit of a matrix, but how much are these people actually costing you? Not only, yes, salaries, wages, but in time, effort, energy, disruption, downtime, not delivering on what's expected. Versus, I'd like you to think, those real high performers in your organization, those highly engaged people that are generating ideas, that are thinking about how can we improve the business? How can we solve these challenges? Typically, we'd see them with a really positive outlook towards the organization. They're committed, they're emotionally committed to the organization. And they will drive positive results. That will be a positive return on investment. Now, the question to you is then, how much is this person making you, right? Because that's really what it would come down to, is these people, not only you might be spending money on their salaries and wages and costs and development and whatever that might be, but they're typically people that are out making you money in some way, shape or form through their own productivity, through delivering on an outcome. And this is where we can start to shift the equilibrium in your business. And the aim is obviously always to try and have more engaged staff than disengaged staff, people who are well suited to their role, who are delivering positive outcomes for the organization. But this does not happen by chance. It's not just some magic wand and it happens overnight. It's something that has to be actively worked on. And it is a strategic component of your business. And what we see is a lot of head in the sand. That's, we don't want to think about it too hard, because it requires a lot of management. And often that's an area where people don't feel as comfortable. But what we want to share with you is how you can get some more data around this. And if we have a little bit more data, then we can make more informed decisions. So what I'd love for you to do is I actually want to get your perspective. And I know we've got quite a number of people on the call today, but I want you to get out your phones. I think that's always the facilitator's nightmare, is to ask people to pick up their phones. But I actually want you to pick up your phone, or it could be just a web browser that you've got on your laptop right now. And so I want you to open a Google Chrome, whatever that might be. And in the URL at the top, I want you to go to menti.com. So you can see it at the top of the screen there, menti.com. And if you press enter, it's going to ask you for a little code. And the code is sitting at the top there. So it's 31805851. And you can press enter. Now from here, you can select, actually, I'm going to quickly, yes, I want you to select what data you're using to make people decisions. So is it that you're looking at your P&L? Is it that you primarily look at salary benchmarking? Are you looking at turnover stats? Are you looking at your exit interview feedback? Because that helps us work out what's going wrong in the business. Are we using an engagement survey? Are we using psychometrics of people so we can work out how to motivate them and whether they're a good fit in their role? Competency assessments is really looking at, again, helping you identify sometimes that skill gap. Or is it more subjective? So subjective insights is people just come to you and say, hey, you know what, we've got a problem here, we need to act on it. And that is more of a subjective insight. So I'd love to get your perspective. You can just select one, and that's always going to be a bit hard, is going, what primarily are you using? And then in my next question, I'm going to ask you something else, but I'm keen to get everyone's perspective of what they're using primarily to make those people decisions. Interesting to see we've got lots of people looking at their P&L. Yeah, absolutely. Where's the cost item around here? What's going on? Is the business performing, not performing in certain pockets? Because again, that's data. P&L is a great objective form of data of the ins and outs of the organization. And then lots of people, secondary is subjective, and I've been in business long enough and sat around executive tables, and it is often, when it comes to people, is manager walks in and says, hey, we've got a problem in this area and this is what we should do. And it's not backed up with any data. It's just, here's my instinct, here's what my intuition is telling me we should do. Now that's hard for the most expensive line item on your P&L, is to trust a subjective perspective on it. So really good. Thank you, everybody. That's some really, really good feedback. And I've got one more question for you. Now, this is open-ended, so you can actually type in whatever you want, and sort of a little short response. What would help you make better strategic people decisions? So in a perfect world, what would you like to see? What would be helpful for you when you have to make these decisions? Whether it's about where we make an investment, where we cut costs, where we proactively drive an initiative that may be presented to you. What do you want to see as CFOs of your organizations? What would help you make better strategic people decisions? All right, let's have a look. Better performance indicators, yeah, that are easier to track. Fantastic. Capacity metrics, awesome. That's a really great metric, because it's really looking at how people are performing within, the hours of the day, and are they operating at capacity or not? And that can be a really helpful metric within an organization, but often just not tracked in many businesses. Productivity, a little bit more ongoing feedback. Overall business strategy, yep. Yeah, there you go. A universal work factor for my business so I can understand how busy a team is and determine whether or not they need more staff. Because that's a big one where people go, I need another headcount, I need another headcount. You're like, but I don't have any data here. I can't see capacity. I can't see skills. I can't see, purpose of role and how that's connected to the strategy and what are the desired outcomes and outputs. Absolutely. Transparency and accurate data. There's some really good pieces of feedback here. Capacity, performance tracking. There's a lot around productivity, but also KPIs. I would love to have valuable information on when to hire and when to scale down. Absolutely, and that's a really challenging one. Transparency, people have mentioned a lot of that. Engagement, talent, productivity. Excellent, really good. But you can start to see like how valuable having more people data would be when you have to make financial-based decisions, or let's be honest, business decisions, because if it's related to people, it's going to be a business decision. It's going to be connected to a strategic outcome. And you need more data when it comes to this. Regardless of the size of your organization, it is possible to get more data when it comes to your business. Now, don't forget as well, obviously we've got the Q&A function, so if anyone's got any particular questions, feel free to type them in as we go along as well. All right, so the next thing I want to share with you is the nature of people data. So what options are there? And obviously I put a few up on the screen earlier around what you could be looking at. I would say most organizations operate in the lag. It's things that have already happened versus predictive data. So lag data can include your P&L. It's lag data. It's things that have happened that are in the balance sheet. Your turnover percentage, you might, have your HR people report on turnover and, it's peaking up a little bit, it's down a little bit. But I would say to you, what do you do with that information? And that's often the challenging conversation I have with HR people is I say, what do you do with this information? What decisions do you make? Are you analyzing this at a departmental level? Are you looking at this over a long period of time and you're predicting that we consistently have turnover in a particular age demographic and we need to make a strategic program around that? Like, what are you doing with this data? And often they don't know what to do or they aren't doing anything. They're just reporting on it because they've been asked to submit it. But the person asking also hasn't said, what are we using this data for? Then we've got things like cost to hire and days to recruit. And these are things recruiters inside your organizations might be presenting on. Valuable, because we're looking at the cost of recruitment. How long a role might be vacant, that's costing your business money. Performance reviews, if you do those in your business and having a way to track that across the organization, I would say then what are you doing with performance reviews? Is anyone actually plotting it out into a framework, looking at the percentage of who sits in what bracket and what you're going to do around that? I mostly see organizations doing their performance reviews, putting them in a drawer, never to be seen by the rest of the organization. So I'd say it's great we're doing those reviews and having that engagement with staff, very important, but then what can we do with this data and how should we be presenting it back? Things like absenteeism and leave and sick statistics are really helpful to understand what's going on. Sometimes you might see your organisation peak in sick leave. That might cause some concern for you. So again, sort of lag data helping you to make a better decision. And even exit interview feedback. So some organisations we work with, when we meet them, they say, oh, we look at our exit interview survey data. And I say, well, that's good, but you're looking at people at the point in which they've decided to leave versus the people that have decided to stay. So it's helpful, but it's a very small amount of data which you need complemented with more predictive data. So you might have your own list of lag data, and this is a helpful activity for you to sort of write down, what do we do? If I write lag on one side of the page and lead data on the other, what are we doing in lag data as a business? How much are we using? Because this could be a great conversation for you to have with your executive teams and your CEOs and maybe HR teams if you've got them, to say, well, what lag data are we currently using? You might not be using any at all. Now, then we sort of transition into what we call lead data or predictive data that helps us make future-based decisions and more forecasting. And this is where a lot of financial people, their eyes light up and go, yes, some financial insight into the future of the organization. And we start to see this concept of strategic workforce planning, which is quite a big bucket of things that sit underneath that. But in principle, think about, we've got our company strategy and where we're heading. We know what we need to do to deliver upon that strategy. And then we look at the people component of how do we deliver upon that strategy, right roles, right team, like resources. There's quite a lot that goes into that. What roles should we hire when? But also, what are the skill gaps in that market as well? There's also things like a talent matrix, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. Many of you may not have seen something like that, and that helps you get a bit of a dashboard of what's the performance versus potential that's sitting in our business. Then we've got our engagement survey, which I'll go into a little bit as well. We've got behavioural assessments, so this might sit in your psychometric bucket. And we're seeing a massive uptake in psychometrics across the board, but beyond just the pre-screening, because typically organisations have used assessments to pre-screen people, but there's actually this huge amount of untapped capability that sits in those assessments to look at my workforce and how are we going to manage our workforce? How do we do succession planning? How do we motivate and inspire them? How do we build self-awareness in our culture? There's actually a huge amount of predictive work you can do with those assessments if you're capturing them. And then lastly, competency assessments. And this is an area a lot of businesses really struggle with, is looking at what are the skills required within an organisation, within roles, and what is the competency that is needed for the organisation. And this is our lead data to help us make more informed decisions. Someone also mentioned in that about capacity, looking at people's capacity. Again, they're all measurements that can be used, probably more lag data, but very helpful data. And again, thinking about what are you doing right now in these two columns, and then potentially saying, what would you like to get access to? Because if you walk away from today with some key actions of what type of data do I know we need for our business moving forward to make better strategic decisions and to bring to the table, then you've got a great outcome from today. So let's have a look at a talent matrix, because I can talk about it in theory. I want to show you one because most of you are probably quite visual. You want to see one for yourself. Here's an example of a talent matrix, sometimes referred to as a 3x3 or a 9-box grid. And what this does, now underneath here is actually like a little rubric of who would qualify for each bucket. I'm not going to go into that much detail for you. So whilst it can be subjective, because it's a perspective on an individual, there are some measurements that we would say, does this person meet this criteria? So subjective with objective overlaid. But you can see on this bottom horizontal line, we look at somebody's potential, whether they're passive, whether they're capable or accelerator. We think, some people might have really great potential and future growth opportunity versus some people are really capable, strong, versus those who are just, I'm not got my foot on the accelerator from that potential, but I might be well suited to what I'm doing. And then on the other side, we see performance over time. So what is their track record indicate? Are they at or below standard, at or above, and then significantly above? And you can start to see now we have these categories. So people down in the purple, we would want to have a bit of a plan with. Sometimes it's just they're new to the organisation, new to their role, but sometimes we see this, their performance over time is low and their growth potential is low. We might have some severe performance issues and we need to come up with a plan around that. Versus our hidden potential, which actually we think they're really capable, but maybe they're just too new for us to rate. We might see some of our new starters sit there. All the way up to our green boxes who sit on that right-hand side, who are high potential and emerging leaders. I once did this activity years ago with an organisation I was working in, and we would do this every sort of 6 to 12 months and really map out every employee in the whole business, and we created a real dashboard for about 250 people. And our high potential leaders and emerging leaders, that was where we wanted to really make sure we had retention strategies in place, development plans. They were really going to help us grow the organisation. But there was significant turnover in this area. Now, those people cost you more when they leave. And that's what we were seeing, as these people were identified as high potentials, but the business wasn't doing enough at the time to retain them. And that became, they're a high value employee versus low value employee. We need to do everything we can to retain them. So this dashboard helped us make more informed decisions around things like development, training, coaching, mentoring. It might be roles opportunities, succession planning. It really gave us more insight into what was going on in our business, and it was presented at the executive level. So we had a really clear view of the organisation and what was happening. And managers were held accountable for their plans around each person in their team and where they sat. So this is just a bit of a big picture, but there's layers underneath this that you can drive with your organization. We help companies with this in particular. This is a bit of a project to roll out in your business, but it absolutely gives you more objective with, yes, subjective component, but at least it gives you some metrics to measure and put people into this framework. The other thing that most companies do, and we're seeing a real uptake of, especially when we talk to our clients and some people in the market, is, well, we've all heard of the Net Promoter Score we use with our customers, but an E-Net Promoter Score. So it's our employee Net Promoter Score, and it typically gives you a score. And we see this on strategic plans. We want to improve our E-Net Promoter Score with our employees from a, whatever it might be, 3 to a 4, and that's what they're working on. But it's actually not an overly helpful piece of data, depending on how it's presented to you. So you would see it, there's a bit of a dashboard on the left. It's very big picture. It's sort of an overall score. And the only way to explain this to you in a way that hopefully makes sense, it's almost like when you do one of those health apps online and, you fill out all these questions and it says, hey, here's your health score. Let's work on improving your health score. But it actually doesn't tell you anything underneath the surface. You have no idea what's really going on. You just get this wellness score and it's quite generic. Versus getting data, think of like a whole body scan, full blood workup, all of those things. We can actually work out, yep, you're doing okay in these areas, but you've actually got a huge amount of inflation or inflammation in your body in a particular area. And so, potentially you've got an infection. And actually then we've done a scan and we've noticed that our infection is in your knee, right? And it's maybe not impacting your overall health, but we're seeing that this infection is actually looking to get worse. And if we dig into it, we've found it's actually quite severe. It needs to be treated in your knee, right? So then we can isolate where is the problem, what's going on, what are the things that are going really well and obviously working for your health. Great, we need to keep doing those things, but what's really going on? Now, this type of data is far more helpful than just a general health score, which you can't really do a lot with. But for some reason, organizations do that with their engagement survey data. You just get a score and they seem to be obsessed with this score. We always say we actually don't care about this top level engagement score. I want to know what you're doing with the data underneath. What is going on in your business? We use an engagement survey through a tool called the Predictive Index. And it's a very comprehensive engagement survey. So everyone across your business does it. There's 50 questions and it looks at things like how people feel about their job, their manager, the team and the people they work with, and then the overall organization. But what makes this survey more impressive than others is that we can segment the data. And it's to do with how the surveys run in the first place. It's still anonymous. You need to have more than 5 people in any given category for us to pull up a result like this. But what it helps us do, and you can see here very quickly, you're like, oh, I've got all these big green patches, but then actually my eyes are drawn to these red areas. These red areas are problem areas. I can now have a look at what department they're in or who their manager is. I can have a look at the question itself. I can maybe attach that question across multiple segments. I can look at particular tenure groups and what's going on with them. I can look at male, female. I can look at age brackets. I can now start to dig a bit deeper. What we do is we go and run workshops with segments and we agree what are the segments we're going to do. So ultimately everyone is attending a workshop, but we then go deeper into their results and we go, let's help us understand what is working well, what is not. Here are the questions you didn't do. You've marked relatively low. Why? What is causing that? That feedback from the workshop is just as valuable as this data itself. It helps us make more informed decisions or present more informed situations to organizations to make better decisions. Because there's no point collecting data if you're not going to do anything with it, right? And staff also don't respect organizations who just keep surveying them and don't do anything about it. We see tools using things like, happiness indexes that go out every Monday. challenge I ask all businesses is, what do you do with it? Are you then using it to have better conversations, to go to particular audience groups? What are you doing with this data? Because data collection is nice, but it's not helpful unless you do something with it. Now you can see, I mean, this graph is quite overwhelming when you look at it, but just to show you that heat map, right? It's how do I diagnose what's going on in my business? What are these parts of my business that might be at risk? And then we put together like a bit of a high risk. What could be going on in your business? And in this instance, you can see that women scored particularly low on this question, which is it wouldn't take much for me to leave the organization. So we would say, actually, we might have a problem with this pocket of demographic. We've got an age group that's sitting quite on the line at sort of 50%. Keep in mind, you've go all the way up to 100, so that would be a concern. We've got a tenure group, 5 to 10 years. Think about people in your business that have been there for 5 to 10 years. These are your knowledge custodians of your business. They have so much knowledge and wisdom. If we were to lose this pocket of group, we would be gravely concerned. But they're actually not scoring very well, and there's a huge amount of them with 32 staff there. And then we had a pocket around project managers in this organisation. Again, key critical component of our business. We know that they're actually very hard to recruit for. The cost of churn in that division would cost us millions of dollars. So you can start to use this data to now go and investigate. Go and sit with this as a focus group, understand their situation, what's causing it, and we can address those to stop the business from hemorrhaging money, which is what potentially would happen if we saw churn in these areas. So you can see how we can collect data, but it's about analysing it, having conversations, dealing with staff, and then making more informed decisions that are based on data and evidence, rather than just let's do a blanket wide program. Actually, let's go in and potentially we're going to do something that's a little bit more tailored or bespoke for a pocket, or something needs to be addressed more intensely. Like we would treat something more intensely. We might need to do that. Not to say we wouldn't make sure there's things available to everyone, but there are times when we might need to actually address something, because if we lost those project managers, for example, or the people in that tenure bracket, we're losing millions of dollars of knowledge that we just cannot replace. For you as CFOs, this information is highly, highly relevant and impactful. But then we probably want to think about, well, how do we predict or create, right, a high value employee? Think high performing, and I always say high performing, but for you, it's that high value. You know, these people that we saw earlier, those high engaged people. There is a little bit of science behind it, and I'll try and sort of walk you through that. We look at this model where we think about the right person. So if you look at a single person, we use a framework called the head, the heart, and the briefcase. And if we think about the briefcase, that's, you know, all the skills and knowledge people have when they walk into their role. It's what they bring with them. You could almost call it their baggage, but it might be their education, their training, their qualifications. These are the things they carry around with them. But that briefcase does evolve over time quite significantly. As you learn new skills, you're adding it into your briefcase. Then you've got your heart, and these are your values, your ethics, and even things like your attitude towards certain things. And these are really important, especially as we look at culture fit and really identifying people that values have some level of alignment with the organisation's values and the ethics of that person, and also making sure that their attitude is aligned with the business as well. And lastly, but most importantly, we have the head. And this is how people are hardwired. It's their behaviours, it's their drivers, it's their motivators, and it's also things like their cognitive capability. Think about how fast someone learns. And is that person in alignment with their job? They might be in a heavily complex job and they don't have the cognitive function to perform in that role. So ultimately, we've got to look at all of these things when we look at a person. But then we have to look at the role. You know, what is the role that we're asking them to do? And is there some good synergy there? But knowing that, yes, we'll have some behavioural components, we'll have skills that they need. But when we talk to companies about what are some of the key reasons people are unsuccessful, is it that they didn't have the skills to do the job? We often hear this, it's more about their behaviours. You know, they were performance managed out because of their behaviours. They displayed the wrong behaviours. They couldn't keep up with their job, maybe poor fit to the job or poor fit to the culture of the organisation. it wasn't usually the briefcase. It's typically the head followed by the heart. But yet we don't seem to assess the head within the organization. And that is where we start to think about psychometrics and really looking at what drives and motivates people and making sure those assessments are well aligned to what you're wanting to get out of them. But then we can take it one step further. So we don't just want to get right person, right role. Now we know if we get the right person in the right role, they will thrive, they will flourish, they will become highly engaged, highly motivated. If we get that right person, they're in a job they love. They enjoy turning up to work every day. They're under the right management. They're aligned to the culture and where it's heading. If we can get that on an individual level, we then need to think about how do we get that on a team level and how do we get that team aligned to the strategy. And this is where most organizations can't operate because they don't have the data to do it. But this is where we help organizations look at the team formation, but not just your team formation of people in alignment with these quadrants, which I will explain to you in a minute, but what is the strategy? Is the strategy actually, we need this group of people to be outward facing, talking to new people, building relationships, generating ideas? That would be a particular quadrant, what we call innovation and agility. Or do we need them in the inverse? We need them heads down, following process, being very precise, being accurate, being meticulous. And because the strategy we need is probably around minimizing waste, being efficient. We need people who are well suited to deliver on that strategy. And often we see teams underperforming because the team itself has some gaps or some areas where it doesn't understand why it's not delivering. It's probably around a people capability component or a person not aligned to a role we might need them to be doing within their strategy. And this is where we start to use science to map this out. And again, we use a tool called Predictive Index to do this, where we profile a person. Then we can start to map the team. Then we can actually then assess your strategy using another assessment tool, and we can map it out into this framework. And it's very powerful data that we use with clients that might only have 20 staff. We still are able to map their strategy and look at their team and look at teams underneath that team, and look at what are the gaps, what are the opportunity, what are the blind spots. Actually, if we're going to recruit a new role, what are some issues that we have that we might need to address? And again, we're using a little bit more data around not only recruiting, but maybe development and succession and who should we put over here and moving people around our business. I've actually got a bit of a playbook around how to do that. And I'll give you an example. So here is the profile. And again, I'm showing you a predictive index sort of result that we get out of the tool when someone takes the assessment. And it measures these 4 drivers. Now, I'm not going to unpack the science with you, but I will explain to you what's sitting here. So in this person's result, this is sort of the profile of a new business development, ideally, because it's the nature of the job. So if you think about a new business development or a BD role, they need to be very goal-orientated, competitive, self-driven. They probably want to competitively get ahead of the curve. They want to think about where they're heading. They can knock on 10 doors and have 10 rejections and they keep on going. They're very independent. We probably want them to have some social drive. We want them to be able to connect with people. We want them to talk comfortably. We want them to connect quickly. We probably want them to have some urgency to them. We want them to be proactive, right? I hear that all the time when I'm dealing with sales teams and those new business roles. We need proactive people who can take ownership and accountability, and we want them to connect with our clients. We want them to follow enough rules and structure not to break things, so maybe to do things in the CRM and complete tasks. But this is really what we're looking for, potentially for an organization with their new business development. Now, if we were to change that then across to an account manager, so someone who's sitting inside an account that already is a client, but maybe we're now asking you to service that client, make sure things are delivered, and then we want you to work on upselling and expanding that account and finding new opportunity. We actually may not need that person on the left. That actually may not be well suited to the role when we profile the job. So when we profile the job of an account manager in this scenario, we actually want someone who's a little bit more agreeable, who's going to say to the customer, how can I help you? It's not about me, it's about you. We often say they're a little bit more we-driven, like how can we help you? How can we get there together? And they've probably got a lot more rules and structure. So we know that account managers need to make sure that people have delivered upon that project before we go and ask you for more deals or more money. We need to deliver against that standard. So this person might be really into the details a little bit more, still wanting to connect and work quickly, but definitely much more structured than our previous business development rep. So in sales, we might have 5 or 6 different sales profiles depending on the roles that we're asking them to do. It might be different again for an SDR or someone who's just doing lead gen. Might be different for somebody who's doing after sales support, right? Again, you'd put them all under this big banner of sales, but actually every role looks a little bit different, and the drivers and behaviors of the role are different, which means we're looking for different people. Now, if I put an account manager, this type of profiled person, if we were to find them and I move them over to business development, we'd start to see some gaps maybe in their performance, that maybe they're not proactive enough, they're not assertive enough to get through the door, they're not, maybe they're getting so stuck in the detail they can't move on to the next task and they're spending too long on something. So we would start to potentially, and vice versa, I could put a new BD in that role and they might be too assertive and rub the customer the long way because they're moving on to the next deal. So even though there's just slight nuances, we could actually start to predict some friction points that might turn up. And that's how you look at it from an individual and a job perspective, and really looking at, is that person well aligned to their job? Because if they're well aligned to their job, they've got the behaviors and the cognitive function to do the job, we are more likely to see success in that person. But again, companies struggle to get this type of data beyond just recruitment. Then we think about, well, how can we use this data to make more informed decisions? And this is where we start to look at, this is an example of an underperforming sales team. You can start to see these 4 quadrants. And again, we're going to map it into this framework that we have. And you see this top right, this exploring, or what we call innovation and agility quadrant. This is actually when we profiled the sales job for this company, this BDM role, it did sit up in that quadrant. But you can see we've actually, everyone kind of sits on the border. We then overlaid each individual with their sales targets and performance, because that obviously plays a metric. You might be not suited to your role, but maybe you're performing for some other reason. We want to look at multiple pieces of data in a row and then start to make some informed decisions. But what we saw was we had 2 people who were not performing consistently. So these orange bars that I'm showing you, this is the profile of the job. Looks actually really similar to what we had earlier on the left-hand side, that sort of proactive, self-driven, quick to connect style person. And you can see this person's profile with the A, B, C, D, they're actually really misaligned to the job, probably much more calm and steady, probably not delivering on deadlines with that really low formality drive. So there's some misalignment there. When we looked at their results, we saw inconsistency in deliverables. We had another person in the team. Their profile was much more calm, steady, not enough dominance drive, not enough proactivity, much slower to connect, again, not well suited to the role, and also not delivering on their performance outcomes. So we start to see this connection point. What we were seeing is those people who were well aligned, a little bit closer to this job and had some key components in common, like they were proactive, which neither of these profiles are. And then what we did is we said, we made some moves internally with these people. But then it was about, how do we fill this team out with people that we have a greater chance of success with? So then we used this tool during recruitment, and we made lots of proactive decisions to profile as close to this profile as possible. And this is an example of their sales team about 12 to 18 months later. And you can see that clustering in that top right-hand corner. Yes, we hired some people that sit a little bit outside of that, but they had a little bit different roles that we asked them to do. And you can start to see that we then use this, and you can see on the right-hand side, to predict the team dynamics. So with sales teams always comes conflict because they're all typically very self-driven and competitive. This then helped us understand and predict what are some of those friction points, and we then could run workshops with them to optimize their performance. We identified their blind spots. You can see their miscommunication may happen because everyone's running 100 miles an hour. And you can also see that they may go back and forth on whether resources should be best spent on certain things. So again, we addressed those things. This helped us proactively address the performance of this team, to reduce friction points, to make sure that they were engaged they were motivated, and they were performing. But we did that through a very data-driven approach. And this organization had less than 50 staff, right? So again, this data is easily accessible to organizations of any shape and size, but it's that openness to wanting to understand the people within your business. So what we do is we take sort of a three-phased approach when we start to think about data in the business. The first is we have to diagnose. We actually have to get a bit of a baseline, and we need to diagnose that organizational data. It's looking at your strategy. It's looking at the employee experience, the employee engagement. It's looking at the current landscape that you're operating in, the pain points, the performance lacking of areas, and to get more data in place. We then need to analyze it. So once we've collected it, we need to analyze it and do something with it, and almost predict what's going to happen based on that data and what it's telling us. And we do lots of different things in this phase. We might do things like the behavioural assessment using PI. We might do certain talent matrix exercises. We really want to analyse and assess what we've got and predict some of those gaps and have more conversations around that, but very targeted conversations. And then lastly, we want to act on it. We want to act, we want to design, we want to develop, we want to take action on this data, and we want to take focused action. With this process, we find organizations end up, yes, making an investment to do this, but spending less money overall because we're optimizing their organization. They're performing at a higher level. They're pinpointing where they make investments, right, around upskilling and development, and how can we do this effectively. But we can't make those strategic decisions without more data upfront. So getting that data and doing the work allows you to make more informed, precise decisions. So that's sort of how we operate when we work with a business and say, yes, we want to take a more data-driven approach to our people strategy. We have another wheel that I could show you that talks about how we use that to attract people, to inspire people, and then how do we grow them, because we need to be able to do that in our people strategy. So hopefully this has been really insightful for many of you sitting watching. I know there's a few questions in the Q&A which I'm going to address, but just lastly, as a bit of a wrap up, many of you are probably thinking, what is this predictive index Alicia keeps talking about? If you scan this QR code, and I'll also put a link to it in the chat, is we've created a unique little landing page for everyone on the call here to take their behavioural assessment themselves and go, hey, where would I sit in that wheel? And, what parts of the strategy would I be well suited to execute on, and what are my drivers and motivators, and what are the things I would be well suited to do and I should do more of, because that's where I add the most value. Take the assessment. It only takes 5-6 minutes. It's a super quick assessment. It's heavily accurate. So predictive index has been around for about 60 years. It's one of many tools we use. We're quite agnostic, but I'd say that is our preferred tool when we're looking at the organizational data, because we can do it on everybody. Heavily accurate, and we can use it in so many different ways. And we can then have a call if you want to talk through that. Otherwise, we can send you your results and you can go on your way. But hopefully this has been really exciting and interesting and a new lens for you. But Caitlin, yeah, open to any of your Q&As that have come through.
Thank you so much, Alicia. That was so interesting, going into all the science behind that. I mean, for me, I feel really grateful I was able to attend this session with you. We have had some questions come through Q&A that I'll sort of lob over to you. The first one's from Robin. When you were talking about, I guess, the skills crisis, she's asked, how is a skill crisis being addressed, and is there idea of when things might improve?
Look, that's a big question. The skills crisis, if you do some research for your industry, may be being addressed at an industry level. So you're seeing a lot of these industry bodies trying to address it for their space. So IT have a lot of different networks and societies trying to address it. I know some independent bodies we deal with are actually going to government to say we have such a crisis in an area, it needs to be addressed at a university level, at a school leavers level. We need to be promoting, maybe women in particular industries or whatever it might be. We've got an issue around immigration, because during COVID we had so many people leave the country. We had about 250,000 skilled workers leave Australia. This is a huge thing for us. We are very heavily fueled on our immigration. It's very important for our economy and our workforce. So the skills crisis, it's probably more industry based than from the overall arching federal government. But I would definitely say have a look at what's going on in your industry. Reach out to us if you like. We actually do some research in industries. We research things like manufacturing, IT, healthcare. Different industries have different pain points. So you can always just reach out to us. We've got some reports that we've generated.
Right. Thank you. The next one was when you were talking about that matrix of right person, right role, right team, right strategy. They were saying this sort of focuses on the employee qualities and capabilities. At what point does the company contribute to their success?
Great question. As early as possible and as much as possible, because ultimately, we want to see this symbiotic relationship where, yes, the employee contributes. They're going to have to do that upskilling or learning or opportunity. They've got to contribute. But we're seeing this absolute need for organizations to be proactive. They need to come to staff and really sit with them, understand their capability, their aspirations, what they want to achieve, what they're passionate about, and what they are looking to take on in terms of their own growth. We see one of the major reasons people leave an organization is they didn't feel like they got growth. And that is so weird. In the research, we see this huge amount of churn because I wasn't given growth or development, but companies are short of skills. So why can't we marry these two things up? Because it's like people want to grow and develop. Organizations need new skills. How do we bridge this gap? And actually, organizations are going to have to lead it. They are going to have to do something about it. But the good news is people want it. That's what the research tells us, is it's the key reason why your high performers leave is lack of growth and development.
How interesting. Great. We've got a few more minutes, so a few more questions, but if you do have any other questions, drop them into the chat. And if we can't answer them today, Alicia will have these to maybe answer separately. We've also got from Warwick, when we were talking through, I guess, the data process, is this data usually used retrospectively or as part of the recruitment process?
Both. So we would want to make sure that we have all the data for your existing workforce. Absolutely. We believe in equality of data. So what we mean by that is everybody should do something like a predictive index. Everybody should do your engagement survey. Everybody should be a part of your capability mapping. Everybody needs to be a part of this process at all levels. It's not like, yes, you might say this pocket is more valuable, but actually we see great transformation in organizations that are focusing on all levels of their business. And so once we've got a good data snapshot of our whole organization, we then go, yes, how do we then bring people into the recruitment process? We understand the jobs, we understand the gaps. Now we're going to get more data when we recruit through, yes, profiling, but also maybe looking a little bit deeper at someone's skills when they join, or their aspirations, or their cognitive capability if they're a really fast learner. And we've got a massive learning journey for them. Great. We've got a good match here.
Yeah. Awesome. We've got, how do you analyze what talent and skills a role needs in a company? I feel like we've maybe just touched on this, but
it's a big question, Glenn. Yeah, look, I think this is where we have to look at your strategy. So we often will work with you on your organizational strategy. And we run through a process of that, of looking at the strategy, looking at what needs to be delivered upon. And then looking at, well, what are the skills needed to deliver upon? What knowledge, what expertise, what subject matter expertise we might need in the business, and how many of those people do we need? What's a backup plan for that? What's the succession plan if that person, like, we then run through that. It's not like a simple press a button and out pops a matrix. It's worked off your strategic plan. And therefore, how important is it to have a strategic plan that's clear, that's concise, that actually is an accurate representation of where you're heading, and it's done a good analysis of even the market you're in, because that's a massive question. And I guess that's the question I think all organizations need to be asking themselves. How do we do this? And let's engage with, I would say most businesses need to engage in external help. And that's really where we fit in, because doing this on your own, on top of your actual everyday job, is impossible. You will never get it done properly, or probably fast enough, given what's going on in the market. So that's where you bring in people who are experts in this, who have frameworks. We come in, we run the process with organizations, but then ultimately so they can be self-sufficient. That's what we always aim for, self-sufficiency, so you can grow your organization with confidence.